Greetings, computer science enthusiasts. Today we're going to take a look at the game lab environment and how to do some very basic things, such as how to draw a sprite on the screen, how to put some text on the screen, and how to even come up with our own unique sprites. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into the animation. So if you look over here on this end of the screen, we've got a code section and an animation tab. I'm going to click on the animation tab. Now, if you want to have an animation that's available for use for you, then what you do is you can hit this and you can either upload or draw your own image, or you can go and pick from all of these different ones that are selected here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the character section and I'm going to choose the pink alien for my sprite. Now, it's very important that you look at this name right here that's given in the section right here. I'm going to need this for later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and highlight that, and I'm going to copy that into my clipboard. All right, so there we have our alien image, our pink alien pink one, and we're going to use this in our programming today. So one of the things I want to teach you how to do is I want to teach you how to connect that image in the animation tab with some code that will show up on the screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be dealing with sprites. So that's what those images are called, is sprites. So I'm going to go to the sprites tab. And right there at the top, you have var sprite equals, and it's purple. Basically, what I want to do is I want to create a name for the images I'm going to be using, and I want to assign it a created sprite at a location. So let's talk about how that process works. So if I do var sprite is equal to create sprite 200, 200, I have now created a sprite. And if I go to the show grid section on this, if I go to the show grid on this interface, you'll see that it puts the coordinates of the grid out. Notice that the upper left corner is 0, 0. And as we move to the right, the X value gets bigger. And here's what's weird. As we move down, the Y value gets bigger. So an increase in Y moves you down, and an increase in X moves you to the right. And the first number is always going to be the X value, and the second number is always going to be the Y value. So I've created a sprite at 200, 200. Now, this particular block accepts two parameters. So that's what these are called. Parameters or arguments, and that's going to load us up at the location in the grid. Those first two parameters represent the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. We'll talk more about functions and parameters later, but basically all you need to know at this point is those two numbers right there reflect the X and the Y. Now, once I've created a variable and assigned it a value, I now have to do something that lets me know that I want that variable to be associated with alien pink _1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the set animation, and I'm going to click under the variable sprite.setAnimation. Now, here's something interesting. This right here can be anything. I could change that to alien, but then that word right there needs to be alien as well. That variable is now what I'm using to set stuff. So if I say alien is equal to create sprite 200, 200, and then alien.setAnimation, I'm setting the animation of this particular variable that's going to show up at this location. Now, remember earlier I had saved to the clipboard the name of that alien. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in. And now I have alien pink 1 is the animation that we set to the variable alien. And then all I have to do is go into the world section and do the draw sprites, And now I have enough information for this to appear. Now, at 200, 200, so I'm going to go down 100, down 200. That's the down for the Y. That's the second number. And then over 200, it's going to put the center of that sprite right here at 200, 200. I can't get on it just exactly. There we go. Anyway, it's going to put that sprite, the center of that sprite, on that location. So when I run this program, you see that this alien was basically a 100 by 100 square, because each of these little squares is 50 by 50. And so this is 100 by 100. The center of it is right there. All right, so now we have drawn a sprite onto the screen. What else can we do? What can we do to expand this stuff? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, usually we have a situation where we go ahead and declare all of our variables up here. But when we start drawing stuff onto the screen, we usually do that in the context of the function draw. And let me tell you why we use draw function. Notice, I'm going to take the grid away. Notice that there's no difference between running the program before and how I just ran that. There's no visual difference. There actually is a difference. The difference is the draw function begins a loop that just keeps following the directions inside this block, inside the green, and just keeps doing it over and over and over and over again. So basically, I just keep drawing the sprite over and over and over and over again to the screen. That'll become important later when we start adding effects to these things. For right now, the important thing is to realize that probably anytime we do any kind of drawing, we're going to put it into the function draw command. And what's happening in there is everything inside this green area is basically repeating over and over and over again forever. It just keeps that visual image there, and it keeps drawing that back to the page over and over and over. So we want to draw some more stuff. So that's the cool thing about the drawing tab. The drawing tab has a lot of different options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore basically three things with you. I'm going to teach you how to change the background of what we currently have with our sprite. I'm going to teach you how to draw a rectangle, a shape, and I'm going to teach you how to put some text somewhere on the screen. So let's go ahead and reset this, and then let's get to it. So what I usually do is every time I create a new aspect to my program, I run it and test it and see if it's doing what I want it to do. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make the background yellow instead of white. So by default, the background of this stage is white. I want to change it to yellow. So looking here, hopefully you can see that there's a bunch of different commands we can use. The first command I'm going to use that I'm going to teach you about is the background command. And I'm going to put this background right in here. And it defaults to white. Notice that white is already the existing background. As soon as I snapped it in there, color became white. If you go into the pull-down menu, there's a pull-down menu here, and it gives you a bunch of color options. Well, I say a bunch. Right now, we've got red, green, and blue, and then yellow. And then there's these RGB things with a bunch of numbers in them. We'll talk about RGB values later. But basically, RGB stands for red, green, blue, and it's the intensity for each of those color pigments to show up on the screen. And by changing those values for those three colors, red, green, and blue, by changing their intensity from 0 to 255, we can come up with quite a few possible combinations of colors. So I'm just going to go with the default yellow, which already has an RGB value assigned to it that actually comes out to be yellow. And so now I want to test it because I put in some code that's going to change my background. So I'm going to run this, and sure enough, now I have my sprite, my alien, my pink alien on a yellow background. So we've changed the background, we put in a sprite. What else can we do? Well, let's put another shape in there. Let's just do a shape without it being kind of a sprite. Let's put a square in there. Now, if you go down here, you'll see, hey, I've got rect, ellipse, text, line, point, regular, polygon, shape. There's a bunch of different ways to draw a square. Probably the easiest way to draw a square is to use the rectangle, because rectangles are squares. And what I'm going to do is the first two numbers are what? Well, what were the first two numbers up here? The first two numbers are the X and Y coordinates. And then for this rectangle block, the second pair of numbers, or the third and fourth number, is going to be its width and its height. How far along is it going to draw left, right? How far is it going to draw up, down? And the interesting thing is when you start doing shapes, now the location is the upper left corner. So if I wanted to put this rectangle right here in the upper left part of the screen, then my location isn't going to be the center. It's going to be the upper left corner of where the rectangle would be. So in this case, I'm going to just start it at 0, 0. And we'll go ahead and leave the rectangle 200 by 200. Since these two numbers are the same, it's actually going to be a square. If the height and the width are both 200, that means all the sides are 200. That means it's a square. All right, let's test it and see what I get. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And notice the default value of this rectangle ends up being gray. And because of the order that I've done it, I've drawn the sprite and then I've drawn the rectangle. The rectangle is in front of the sprite. If I change that, if I move draw sprites down after the rectangle, now the rectangle will be behind the sprite. So the order in which you execute stuff inside your draw function block is very important for what goes on top and what goes on the bottom. I think what I'll do is I'll move it back the way I had it, but I'm going to move the alien down to where they don't overlap. So I'm going to move the alien over another 100 feet, and I'm going to change that to 300, and I'm going to move it down another 100. I said feet, but I mean units, pixels. And so now it's going to go over 300 and down 300. So now when I run, I expect the sprite, instead of being in the center, will be somewhere down here, and it won't overlap with my square. And sure enough, that's what I get. All right, so we have changed the background. We put in a sprite that we picked out, and we've also drawn a square. What else can I do? Well, now let's put some text in there. By default, the text is probably also going to be this gray color. I'm not going to mess with the backgrounds of the individual images. I'll show you how to do that later. How would I put text in? If I scroll down here, sure enough, I see text. So here's the text block. So I'm going to put this in here, and I want my text to say, hello, world. It's like we did in the other one. I'll even go ahead and put an exclamation point there because I mean it. And where do I want it to show up? Well, I want it to be under the square. So I'll move it over, let's say, I don't know, let's say 100. But I want it to be down here somewhere, so let's make it even with the sprite and say 300. And so now I want to test this, so let's draw it and see what I got. I got hello world, and oh my goodness, it's so tiny though. I can barely see hello world. So I think what I'll do is I will go ahead and play around with some of the properties of texts. So if you go down here, you see text font. I'm not going to mess with that right now. Text align, text size. I'm going to use text size because I want to make this text bigger. Now notice that by default it's 12. I guess that means that that's a font size of 12. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Let's scope it up to 20 and see what we get. So I'm going to reset and run, and now sure enough I have hello world a little bit bigger. I can read that. So what have we done here? We've created a sprite, and we put that sprite in the screen. We've changed the background of our screen. We added a square to our screen, and we've even added some text. The important things to remember is anytime you have some parameters, the first two parameters are, I'm going to say, pretty much always going to be the location of where that object would show up in the screen. And then in the case of the rectangle, the next two numbers were the dimensions of the rectangle. And in this case, it became a square. So those are the ways that you use these different blocks. Oh, and also in the text block, the very first parameter or the first argument was what was the text going to say? And we call that the string that the text is using to print out. And then the next two numbers were its location. So here's an exception to the first two things are always location. All right, hopefully you found this video informative and it will help you educate your students on how these blocks work in Game Lab. And I'm hoping that this was productive and it helped you out. So until next time, I want you to keep on coding and keep on creating.